Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 12th of June 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, we'll be looking at the PlayStation 4 conference. It's the other massive piece of news from E3. The time that I'm recording this, the floor hasn't currently opened, so if there is anything really cool on the floor, that will be covered in tomorrow's episode, such as the way of things. So, let's talk about the PS4 conference, shall we? We'll do it in a fairly similar format to the way that we did the Xbox conference, although it's going to be a little bit difficult to cover all the games because there were so many of the bloody things. I'll try my best to condense what was in a rather lengthy conference into a single video. All this and the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. Alright, first things first, let's talk about the actual focus of the conference and what it was clearly designed to do. Now, a lot of people are basically calling this a massive broadside at Microsoft. And they're also calling that Sony clearly won this E3 with this particular conference. There's a few reasons for that, so let me break down why it is that people actually believe it. Firstly, the conference was covered in games. Massive amounts of games. And this, I think, was something that a lot of people weren't expecting because the PS4 conference originally was actually loaded with games. So the assumption would be, well, we don't have anything else to show you because we already showed you all of it in the launch announcement for the PlayStation 4, so we'll focus more on other stuff. But the odd thing about this conference was they didn't do that at all. They really did focus on the games, actually even more so than the announcement of the system. They barely spoke at all about the technical aspects of the actual machine and touched only upon the issues of always on DRM as well as used games towards the end of the show. And that was after over an hour and a half of games. I mean, you were just bombarded by games the entire time. So many games, in fact, that some people were like, please stop, talk a little bit about these games. And they would actually put out 3 to 4 game trailers back to back, one after another, and not even necessarily actually talk about them whatsoever, which might have been a weakness in the presentation, but it certainly had the effect of shock and awe. They also placed a great deal of focus on the idea of supporting indie development. This is one of the first real shots across the bow, as it were, and it's aimed squarely at the fact that you will not be able to self-publish indie titles on the Xbox. Now, the Xbox One's presentation, its conference, only had 3 indie games, one of which, of course, was Minecraft, which is barely an indie game anymore. The other 2 that they had were Max and the Curse of Brotherhood and Below. And neither of these titles are really strong entries as far as I'm concerned when it comes to Xbox Live, and that's an advantage that Microsoft has traditionally had over Sony in the sense that they've been able to nail these big exclusive premium indie titles. And stuff like Bastion came out on Xbox first. We're talking about stuff like Castle Crashers. We're talking about pretty much anything that was ever featured in the Summer of Arcade. There were a lot of very strong titles on there, whereas in the first year or 2 of its life, PlayStation 3 did not have that many good downloadable games. Xbox ran away with it. Now, Microsoft has unfortunately sat on their laurels just a little bit. Admittedly, Summer of Arcade was still a very potent way of getting at least these timed exclusives onto the system. However, it's super curated, and if you don't get on there via the Summer of Arcade, chances are you're not going to really be seeing all that much success because they won't heavily promote the title. Sony, on the other hand, decided, you know what, we're going to show like 10 indie titles. Now, some of these are exclusive, some of them aren't. Most of them aren't. Just bear this in mind. I think one of the things that people are taking away from this is, wow, look at the number of games the PlayStation 4 has. You're right, but a lot of those games are also on other systems as well. And in fact, the Microsoft conference did actually show slightly more exclusive titles, or at least ones that were not going to be available on PS4. Now, in terms of the indie games, they were saying that console debut will happen for pretty much all of these games, and there were a lot of them. We're talking about games like Transistor, Raise the Dead, Secret Ponchos, and so on and so forth. There was a gigantic pile of them. They showed all the devs on stage, which to me was an absolutely fantastic moment because it's really great to see these independent developers actually being given the spotlight and say, yeah, you know what, we really value what you do and want you to be a part of what we're doing. That was fantastic. As someone that very much supports the indie scene, that was pretty heartwarming to watch. That was like the first big focus of the conference itself. The second big focus was on the idea that this machine is not, in fact, restricting pretty much anything in terms of used games or the online system. So they confirmed the following. These are the things that we knew already. These were the things that were announced in February, but we did get that full-on confirmation. The thing about those announcements in February is they were a little bit ambiguous, and as a direct result, people still had doubts, you know, kind of thing that starts hashtag campaigns and so on and so forth, even though we knew 95% that they wouldn't be doing this. Now we got the full-on confirmation, and they said, look, no used game DRM of any description. None. So you can swap games as you wish. They also said no online authentication either. So there really is no mention of the supposed technological patent that would have allowed them to restrict used games. They obviously don't have the intention of doing that. They fully announced it. You can do pretty much whatever you want with your games. They also announced that there would be no online check-ins of any description. Admittedly, they did not mention any of the more interesting features of the Xbox One, but I have to say that a lot of those Xbox One features are in place due to problems that Xbox itself created. That's the big thing. You look at the notion of, oh, you can log into your friend's account and so on and so forth. This is all a big replacement of the idea that I could just take a game, hand it to my friend, and they can play it. As cool as these features sound to someone that buys almost exclusively digital stuff on the PC, you've got to bear in mind that these features are nothing new to a console owner. They are used to being able to trade games, swap games, loan games, rent games, and so on and so forth, whereas myself as a PC user, I'm not. So even though it sounds cool to me, in reality it's not actually letting you do anything that you weren't able to do before. For the most part, it's letting you do less. So more of a traditional approach, less technologically orientated there from Sony when it came to dealing with that. That's going to be the first time I've ever seen an audience chant the name of the company that's doing the conference. That was actually really surreal to watch. It's not what you would expect from a conference at all, but I think it's an example of Sony actually knocking this one completely out of the park in terms of the presentation. It was just a massacre to watch. It was great game after great game after great game. It was no missteps whatsoever. Aside, of course, from one. Something to bear in mind before we talk about the games. So, PlayStation Plus will now be required for multiplayer. They've confirmed it will not be needed for media services such as Netflix. Now, that's actually still an advantage over the Xbox, which has traditionally required you to pay for Xbox Live in order to use Netflix. It's a pretty ridiculous notion because, of course, Netflix doesn't use Microsoft servers in any way, shape, or form, and yet you're charged for it anyway, which is outlandishly stupid. Now, they also unveiled, of course, the PlayStation 4 was the most popular external device to use Netflix on, which is unsurprising considering it doesn't cost anything. I mean, if you're going to pay for Netflix every month, the last thing you then want to do, if you're not playing multiplayer games, is also pay for Xbox Live to actually have the privilege of using Netflix. I mean, it's an absurd notion, really, and no other machine actually does that. To me, as someone that's been subscribed to PlayStation Plus for like the last 2 years because it's insanely good value, they do give you a lot of games, a lot of content, a lot of discounts as well. It's very easy to save money using that service. And yes, you don't get the games permanently, but at a $5 a month price, you might as well. It's something you could just leave in the background and leave it running for a month-to-month basis and not really care. And you might say, well, $5 is a lot of money. It's like, that's the cost of a Subway sandwich. One sandwich that you'll finish in like 5 minutes. So $5 is actually a really great way to get cheap gaming. If you can't afford games, then PlayStation Plus is ideal because it gives you those free titles every month and they stay in your library as long as you continue to be subscribed. I've got probably about 20 free games that I got off that service. And it's a lot, not to mention the discounts and things that I've saved money with over time. So it's more of a value-added proposition. But this time around, they're saying, right, you've got to pay for the multiplayer. So if I was to point to a fairly serious black mark on the actual system compared to the PS3, it would definitely be that. Just saying, yeah, okay, you have to pay for multiplayer now. And as a PC owner, that's very odd. But then I guess I also subscribed to WoW for 7 years, so I probably shouldn't be thinking that. But there you go. They've decided that they need that money from you. But at least before screwing you, they're willing to take you out to dinner, right? Yeah, that's the cool thing about it. It's like saying, well, yeah, we're going to screw you with $5 a month to play multiplayer, but look at all this free stuff you get as well. Like, all right, okay. I could definitely see myself, especially when buried in an hour and a half of positivity, seeing the upside of that and saying, yeah, you know what, this is an acceptable compromise. Now, they also mentioned stuff about the PlayStation Vita. They're still trying to get people to buy this bloody thing. I own one, and it's sadly dejected in the corner after Persona 4. I've got to say, even Soul Sacrifice didn't really keep my interest for that long. But they mentioned that there will be God of War HD 1 and 2, as well as an HD version of Flower. Walking Dead will be on PlayStation Vita as well. There were no big exclusives announced. I think that's probably the most worrying thing for the Vita, is that if they really had a big, hard-hitting exclusive for this system outside of their Killzone game, then they would have probably said so right then and there. Killzone is definitely not enough to keep me playing on that thing. I've told you what I think about console shooters many times over. It looks good, don't get me wrong, but PS Vita does need some pretty strong support, and it's got to come from somewhere. The question is where. When you're in this situation where the system just doesn't have an awful lot of killer apps and people aren't buying it, it's difficult to encourage third parties to develop for the system without paying them a boatload of cash. So it may be that we need something strong, especially for the Japanese market. We may need a Monster Hunter title. We may need a really strong JRPG. Persona 4 was a good start, but again, it is a gold version of something that already existed. So I don't know. I'm still doubtful as a Vita owner. However, it seemed to me during the conference that they were actually shifting the focus of the Vita from an independent gaming platform to being a companion device for the PlayStation 4. Saying, yeah, you can stream pretty much all your games. They announced before the conference that remote play would be mandated in all games. So you can play your PlayStation 4 games on the Vita as long as you're on the same Wi-Fi network, which is of limited use, I have to say. It's actually a very limited use. The idea really being that you can play it while someone else is using the TV. So very similar to the way that the Wii U actually works. And it seems to be like they're kind of resigning themselves to the fact that getting killer apps onto the system is going to be difficult. So, hey, it's a companion device. Well, it's a pricey companion device. So I don't necessarily think that that's the strongest way to look at it. They also came out with a bunch of really strong PlayStation 3 titles. They showed Last of Us. They showed something new called The Puppeteer, which looks nice and colorful. Difficult to tell really what it is. Beyond Two Souls, which we knew about anyway, and then Gran Turismo 6. This, of course, was a pretty strong list of exclusives, as you're well aware. Last of Us, PS3 exclusive. We presume that Puppeteer is. Beyond Two Souls is a PS3 exclusive, as is Gran Turismo 6. So that's a pretty strong lineup there for the PlayStation 3. They then went on to talk about Arkham Origins, which is on like every platform imaginable, so hey, who cares about that? And now that we've talked about everything that's pretty much not the PlayStation 4 lineup, let's talk about the actual games themselves. Now, the first thing to take away from this conference, I feel, is that aside from the stuff we already knew about for the PlayStation 4, the actual list of exclusives was not that high. Killzone, Drive Club, Infamous, and Knack were the 4 big exclusive titles that we knew about in the original unveiling. And we saw some more footage from all of those things. Infamous probably looks like the most promising of them. Knack definitely looks like a lot of fun. Drive Club is, well, it's driving, you know, and Killzone was kind of back to being its usual self, you know. It'll be a solid shooter that I'll probably enjoy, hopefully with the PlayStation Move, although admittedly they didn't actually mention whether or not the game would be compatible with PS Move. Now, PlayStation Move was not even a part of this conference at all, and neither was the little camera tracking thing. They didn't even mention that or the controller, which is interesting. But we do know PS4 is compatible with Move because we saw it in the original unveiling. But yeah, I mean, it was being Killzone, with a little bit of orange and blue in there. It's nothing really to write home about. It's a strong title, but definitely not a system mover. What did they have going for them in terms of actual exclusives? Well, they did have Order 1886, which does look particularly interesting. It seems like it's got a little bit of steampunk in there, and it's got a little bit of the supernatural. What appear to be werewolves attacking London in 1886 from Victorian-era stuff. It looks particularly interesting. It seems like it was rendered in the engine, but we don't really know anything about the gameplay yet. But if you slap some gears on it and you do a kind of brass, steam-powered, or whatever interpretation of existing weapons, then you've definitely got my attention. So this looks like a particularly strong IP. It is from the Santa Monica studio, which is good indeed because they well, pretty much never make a bad game, so that's always nice to see. They also announced that the remodeled and relaunched Final Fantasy XIV, which is an MMO, would be console exclusive to the PlayStation 4. Admittedly, that's not that strong a title unless they have significantly improved the game, which I heard they have. The original launch of 14 was pretty disastrous. They have done an awful lot with it to fix it, so all credit to them for that. But of course, it's already a game that's been out on PC for quite some time. Now, they did break out Final Fantasy Versus 13, which I believe they've now rebranded Final Fantasy 15, and they also brought out Kingdom Hearts 3. Kingdom Hearts 3, to the best of our knowledge right now, is a Sony exclusive. The problem with this conference, really, is that they were not all that clear about what was exclusive and what wasn't. Unless it was being developed by a first-party studio, it was hard to say. They actually, for the most part, didn't even mention it. So, as far as we know, Kingdom Hearts 3 is a Sony exclusive. Does that mean PlayStation 3, 4, and the PlayStation Vita? Probably. Yeah, probably. But Kingdom Hearts is also a franchise that does sell systems, especially in Japan, so it is something to consider. They may decide to make it a PlayStation 4 exclusive for that very reason. However, things are still very much up in the air. There are conflicting reports across the internet, and it was never actually confirmed during the conference, so hard to say, honestly, at this stage. I'll try and keep you posted on it. Now, they also unveiled Mad Max, which was kind of crazy, considering that it will be developed by Avalanche. And like, wow, really? A Mad Max game by Avalanche, the developers of Just Cause 2. I could not be more giddy about the notion. However, we still don't know if that is a PlayStation 4 exclusive either. They didn't say. It's like, is it, isn't it? Don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Really not 100% sure. Now, another thing that they showed was Elder Scrolls Online. That will be a timed exclusive on the PlayStation 4 by the looks of it. Again, available on PC as well. So, and it's definitely good news for those of us that primarily game on PC, because most of this stuff isn't actually exclusive to that console. Indeed, we also know that Titanfall, a so-called Xbox exclusive, is also coming to PC. So, you've got a lot of these kind of console exclusives, but they come to PC anyway, so great news for us. But the real thing that this conference was actually lacking was just a list of really strong exclusives. Does Microsoft have a stronger list of exclusives at this time? Debatably, yes. The list of exclusives from Microsoft included the following: Rise Son of Rome, Forza Motorsport 5, Quantum Break, Sunset Overdrive, Killer Instinct, Project Spark, Halo 5, Crimson Dragon, Dead Rising 3, and D4. Now, that's, of course, if you don't count Titanfall. That is a larger number of exclusive titles. Yeah? I don't think there's really any doubt about that, and it's got some pretty big names in it. Admittedly, since then, the excitement has been weakened, since Killer Instinct has actually been announced as a free-to-play title with one character by default, and you have to buy every other character. Also, it was discovered that it will be in development by Double Helix, that has a really bad reputation and has basically never released a really good game. In fact, they've released a lot of bad games. Some of the worst games in the last 2 years have come from that studio. So there is not a huge amount of confidence that the new Killer Instinct will actually be any good. That said, though, you have to note that while a lot of games were shown on stage, most of them were not exclusive for PlayStation 4. As much as I've said that the conference does seem to be aimed very much at Microsoft, it's also aimed at something else. Something that hasn't actually been discussed yet, and that's the idea that the console market is slowing down and that it is failing. It is being outstripped by tablet and mobile games. The massive blitz of AAA quality stuff, as well as the interesting indie stuff they showed on stage, is not necessarily saying, look at what we've got over the Xbox, because that's not true. Most of those games will be on the Xbox as well. What it's saying is, look at how strong a lineup this is, and look at all these games you can play if you play on a console. Yeah? And quite frankly, if you look at that list versus what mobile's got, it clearly differentiates the two experiences. It said, this is a core game experience, and we've got tons of really exciting stuff for you to play, even if it's also on our competitor and on PC. That's what I took away from it. That's why it seemed like there was just a complete and total blitz in this particular conference of just game after game after game after game. And even though most of them aren't exclusives, it just said, look at all these new experiences. we know you're bored with the current generation. Here's a bunch of new stuff, and here's why you should be interested in the next gen of consoles. That's what the conference really achieved in my eyes. The final thing to note, of course, would be the price tag, priced at $399, 399 euros, and around 375 UK pounds. Did some maths on the subject, so if you include VAT in the UK price, you're still paying about a £38 premium on the console. Those in Australia can expect to pay 549 Australian dollars, so they're getting, I mean, the UK and Australia is getting kind of equally shafted there. Europeans kind of getting shafted as well. Of course, dollar does not equal euro. So, that's pretty standard for any console launch, but it sucks that this is still happening. The price tag, of course, is attractive, I would say. You know, being $100 cheaper and yet being a faster machine than the Xbox One is a very strong value proposition to core gamers. And quite frankly, this is what happens when you mandate the Kinect, an expensive piece of technology that actually isn't all that useful at all to core gamers. That's a big deal. That's what caused this price increase. To a lot of people, that price tag was the final nail in the coffin to the actual Xbox announcement, just saying, right, well, you're $100 cheaper, you've got all of these games, you're a faster machine, you're not going to restrict us in X, Y, and Z, and you don't have this little camera on top spying on everything we do. Yeah, I think I'm going to buy your console, because it seems more like a games console. When it comes to the PR war, I think it's safe to say that Sony definitely won E3, as it were. I'm still concerned about a number of different things, and quite frankly, I still think the exclusive lineup currently available with the Xbox One is actually the stronger lineup, even though it has some weaknesses. Dead Rising 3 doesn't look anywhere near as fun as the previous games. Killer Instinct is a free-to-play title, which, I mean, God knows what the hell that's going to end up being, especially considering that it's developed by a studio that does not have much repute whatsoever. But there are a lot of strong titles on the Xbox One that are exclusive to the system, and there aren't all that many on the PlayStation 4. We'll see. Will that be enough to sell the system? I mean, I think with all the contributing factors, I don't even think that the software lineup is going to be enough to save the Xbox One, as it were, from an early trouncing. However, we should bear in mind that console generations are very long indeed, and while you can get a slow start, you can very easily catch up and exceed your opponent. Hopefully, this kicks the ass of Microsoft into gear, and we see some real competition in this next-gen console war. As it stands, though, it was a damn good presentation. I was impressed across the board, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they have to offer. Alright folks, that pretty much wraps me up for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Before I go, I would like to bring you the OC Remix track of the day. Final Fantasy has been one of the most remixed games on the entire site. I mean, there's huge amounts of remixes for all of the Final Fantasy titles. Final Fantasy VII, as you might imagine, is a particularly popular theme. This is one of my favorite pieces. It's a remix, quote-unquote, of the main theme of Final Fantasy VII. It's more of a piano cover more so than anything else. A really great arrangement by Bogus Red. And I don't really have anything else to say about it. I just like you to listen to it because it's really quite beautiful. Thank you very much for watching, folks, and I will see you next time.